All right. Look, my name is Quinton Hennigh. I'm a geologist, exploration geologist. I've been in the industry for about 40 years. And I find absolute delight in working with super smart people like Sergei in discovering new ore bodies. And, anybody that knows Sergei knows that he has a long history of finding some of the most important discoveries in modern history. Okay, you're talking to a man here who found Oyu Tolgoi. Okay, this is the guy that found basically what is probably the biggest single porphyry deposit on Earth. And when I first looked at BCM, which was probably 2020, I believe it was. It was when I was at Crescat, and we took an investment in the company because of the data that Sergei and his team had collected. It was so compelling. This data. It said, hey, there's definitely a porphyry or some kind of target below this flat spot in the middle of absolute nowhere in southwest Utah. Okay, now you think, wow, it's a big step, to drill holes in the middle of nowhere. Why would you do this? Well, look, all you have to do is look around at the analogs in the region. We got Bingham to the north, one of the biggest porphyry copper deposits in the world. We got the Robinson District to the west. Again, a world-class porphyry copper gold system. This is the land of giants. Most people don't recognize that the Great Basin has gigantic porphyry systems. But this target, when I saw it in Sergei's work, I said, this one's a winner. Okay, now, Sergei and his guys, they did a lot of great work. Sergei, why don't you tell what people, kind of the steps you went through to develop the target, but then also what the first drilling told you. Okay, I think it's really important to set the stage so people understand the process of exploration.
The first drill hole was drilled prior to my arrival, TK1, and that was the guys followed the very strong magnetic geophysical anomaly that was highlighted by the Airborne Magnetic Survey by USGS. So geophysically, that was the major reason. And there was a lot of arguments. People were arguing back and forth. What is causing this magnetic anomaly? And most reasonable explanation was it's probably porphyry system that had copper core with intense potassic alteration. And this potassic alteration is the result of this magnetic anomaly. So that's why the most reasonable step is just to poke a drill hole. And indeed, it picked up underneath the cover, it picked up quartz monzonite porphyry intrusive rock with some quartz veinlets with copper oxides. The hole was not deep, was basically lost at very, very shallow depths relatively to all other drill holes. But conceptually, it proved it's a porphyry system out there. And that's when I arrived there because, I retired from Anglo-American, and basically my wife saying, well, finally, I'll have all your attention doing art and all that fun stuff around our house. But then Scott invited me to join, and that was very interesting, compelling to me. My discovery itch was there, so I couldn't resist not to join. And immediately the mind started thinking and developing what it might be and what it could lead to. And basically, from there on, we were going step by step, learning, and was going back and forth. And Mother Geology, is always right. And we need to listen to what it is telling us. Taking those signals into account is paramount for the success of any exploration program, Quinton.
Okay, well, look, it is a remarkable story because this is a blind target. I mean, there's basically just geophysics to work with. And early on, you guys actually tagged some porphyry and low-grade mineralization. I mean, there was genuinely mineralization. I remember being at site in, I think it was May of 2022. And you Correct. Guys were drilling, hole 5, okay? And hole 5 was kind of on the western side of the system. But I remember looking at that hole, especially the last 2 meters. And there was pretty good chalcopyrite showing up in that hole. Like there was really nice chalcopyrite right at the end of the hole. I left site thinking, oh my gosh, they're about to make a giant discovery. And then what tell people what happened.
Well, it's the drillers bumped into a fault zone and basically lost the drill hole. And it's not the only one. They lost TK8 later on. It was a good skarn intercept. It didn't go through all the mineralization. Mineralization still continued, and they lost the drill hole. So there is a number of drill holes. Out of 12 drill holes, 7 drill holes were in mineralization, and most of them, except one, TK6, which they finally brought to the targeted depth, was left in mineralization. So that was a big frustration for us, for geologists, when you go through mineralization and then bam, bang into a brick wall and stop right there. And going through that very thick cover, you imagine how much frustration we went. I think now in this phase of drilling, we found the right combination of drilling capabilities that is taking us to the targeted depth.
That's important. Okay. I think people have to understand that any exploration program, especially one where you're tackling something that's deep, it's blind, it's a blind target, you really have to be patient. And unfortunately, you do often encounter challenges like the ones you just described. Now, if you kind of fast forward, I mean, hole 5, 2022, May 2022, it was very exciting. I thought you were onto it. And then as I was driving back to Colorado, I remember getting the phone call saying, oh, unfortunately, the hole ended because the drillers hit a fall. It was disappointing, okay? But then, look, the company needed more money. We put some more money in so you could do more drilling. And then in 2023, okay, you guys announced a drill hole that was very important. I know that hole 8 didn't get clear down to the targeted depth you were looking for or whatever, but tell people what you hit in hole 8. I think it's important people understand.
Yeah. After TK5, we drilled TK6, and we picked up skarn mineralization, and we called it a Eureka zone. And indeed, about 75 feet of nice-looking skarn mineralization gave us more confidence. And that's eventually we drilled TK8, and that was a significant, more than 550 feet of mineralization, which was pretty good. If you calculate everything, that was close to 1% copper equivalent with the current metal prices. And that kept us going. These things. And as you said, persistence, perseverance is really critical for these blind, deep-seated porphyry systems. You need to be patient, but you always need to consistently collect information and review that information critically and try to make the next step better. So it's a continuous process of improvement.
Okay, that's well put. That's perseverance is key. So now hole 8 did hit, like I said, 550 meters or feet rather, which is about 155 meters or something like this.
Yeah.
And it was substantial copper. It was a good grade. It was about 0.65% copper, if I remember right. And it was about 0.1x gram gold. And there was, I think 6 or 7 grams silver in it too, which is interesting. Okay, now that was in the skarn, and I'm just going to put the context around that. What that means is, the skarn is the kind of the shell, the rock that's been altered around an intrusion. So this is where the porphyry comes up, the fluids, including the mineralized fluids, come off the porphyry. They usually produce a shell of copper mineralization, but outboard from that, out into the rocks they intruded, you also find altered rock called skarn. Okay, and these skarn rocks can actually host a lot of the mineralization, and that's basically what you hit. It was something outboard from the porphyry itself, but an important part of the system. Okay, it's very important. And I actually consider that drill hole TK8. I think that was a discovery hole. Now, let's kind of take it to the next step. You guys did try to drill a few more holes. It went very badly. Technically, there was a lot of challenges. and I don't want to belabor that, okay? But what I do want to talk about is what we did with the team from the Colorado School of Mines during that time period. So starting in 2023 and 24, and even into 25, we let them do some technical work. Now, why did we let them do that? Well, partly because the company was struggling to raise money. If you look at that time period, the mining industry is really struggling. Capital was very tight. BCM did not have, significant funds. It took some good science. There was like a period that was quiet in which we could do some good science. And tell people what we did.
Yeah, well, being joining CASERM program at Colorado School of Mines was really beneficial to us. And thanks for your initiative. I think it opened us up to some good skills of Colorado on the Colorado School of Mines. Expertise with the porphyries, but predominantly skarn. We, on our technical team, we have mostly people with the porphyry experience and limited skarn related to porphyry system exposure. So that's why it was very beneficial to us to get better expertise. And basically, they suggested to conduct a research program in order to understand this skarn-related system. And that's what we did. Basically, Matthias and his student collected the samples. My geologist helped them to collect the critical information. And then they conducted an analytical work at Colorado School of Mines. It came up with certain conclusion based on the TK6 and TK8 drill holes. They saw obvious trend of increasing the degree of skarnification. More garnets started showing. The closer you get to the source of heat, the higher the temperature mineral associates that form as a result of this heat exchange between hot magma and cold carbonate rocks. So that's why, based on this research, they came to conclusion that the fluids were coming from southwest to northeast, and that's we thought it's a good piece of work, and we need to test this concept. And that's what we did in this Phase 4 drilling program. Basically, we came to a conclusion, not exactly what the model is telling us. And two big surprises. Basically, yes, first of all, that the porphyry system dismembered and there are big blocks, tectonic blocks that are uplifted, but also that it's not only one porphyry center and the guts of the system, several porphyry centers are active there. And the degree of mineralization in TK is very impressive, because once you realize that in this porphyry, copper-moly porphyry system, the grades of moly are such, then you can conclude what kind of grades will be in the copper core once we find it.
Okay, that's a good point. So just to recap a little bit of what you were saying there, basically we had that scientific study done by the Colorado School of Mines, and that helped develop the next drill program, which was started in April. I think it was in early April of this year. And, bear in mind, we're drilling deep holes. These are deep holes that, the initial 4 holes we drilled pre-collars with reverse circulation, and then we drilled the core portion of the holes after that. So, it's a two-part holes, reverse circulation, core, and did 4 of those. And you're right, we did learn a lot. We discovered that there is an uplifted block that's further to the southwest. And interestingly, that uplifted block actually might be very important here. We're gonna probably find out more about that soon. But we also learned that the original thesis by the School of Mines wasn't necessarily wrong. It was just a little bit, it could be reinterpreted. And I'm going to say that because we went back, I think you and I had a discussion in early June after drilling the fourth hole. And we decided, you know what, let's try to pull back and see if the vector for, increased or proximal skarn isn't basically right underneath hole 8, in that general area. Okay, so that was the reasoning for drilling hole 20. Let's talk about this hole, because I think it's really interesting for people to understand as the hole was being drilled, how we interpreted that rock coming out of the ground, and what it was telling us about this system. In particular, I think we need to tell people how we interpret, or how you interpret, this Moly-Rich component, because this is a little different from most porphyry copper systems. This is a very Moly-Rich system. Whether it's the core or not, we'll figure it out. But why don't you tell people about what we saw in the hole and what you interpret from that hole?
I'd like just to mention here the old prospector's principle. Look for the ore near the ore. So old prospectors for hundreds of years have been testing that and coming to this. I think it's still valid now to present days, this principle. Once we see the concept is started limping, certainly the most logical thing, and you and I, we were discussing this, it makes a logical sense because testing the concept, the guts of the system, strictly speaking, the TK6 and TK8, the interpretation between them was interpolation. That in statistics is called interpolation. It's not 100% guarantee, but it's much more reliable than extrapolation, because if you take TK8 and extend that beyond the constraint, so that has even less reliability to be basically a very distinctive conclusion. And we realized that at the beginning that it could work that way, but may not work that way. And you and I, we were discussing southwest direction, but also you brought up a very good point that geophysical, we did the compilation that anomaly 2 is not going in the southwest direction, it's going in the southern direction. And one of the things we should not ignore, that signal from the Mother Nature. So that's why, I think that was a part of the brainstorming process and thinking. But TK20, when we started drilling, the revelation was really shocking at the beginning, because, as you just said, the amount of molybdenum mineralization is staggering. It's normally typical, the grades is typical to pure moly system like Climax and Henderson. Climax and Henderson is right at about 0.4% moly, but these are different porphyry systems. They are more related to alkalic granites. We are dealing with more mid-composition quartz monzonite porphyry. So, the amount of moly was really a big but very pleasant surprise.
Okay, so let's talk about this. Now, there's two ways of looking at this. I mean, we could have, potentially what we're drilling might be one of these low-grade moly systems like you see in the Great Basin. There's a couple examples like Mount Hope, and there's another one, I can't remember the name. But those grade about 0.08% or 0.1% or something like this. My hunch is, look, we don't have assays from hole 20. But based on the degree of veining, which was very intense stockwork veining, and the number of stockwork veins that actually hosted molybdenite, the mineral itself, I think we're going to see some pretty significant grades. Now, we don't have assays yet, but just visually, I would say we're going to see something significantly higher grade than the typical low grade moly deposits that you see kind of sprinkled around the Great Basin region. Okay, so you could say, well, maybe this is a higher grade version of that. I don't know. I mean, that's a possibility. It's a possibility. But then the other way to look at this is, is this the core, the Moly-Rich core of a very, very large and perhaps equally high grade, like you said, maybe there's a commensurate high grade component of copper here somewhere, system. Okay, to put it in context, Bingham Canyon has a moly core. Okay, it does have a moly, core to it, and that part of the system, the grades in that might be 0.15, 0.2% moly, and they might go up to 0.4 or even a little bit higher locally. Yeah, maybe that's what we're dealing with here. Maybe what we tagged in hole 20 is the core. Now, why would you hit the core? That's what does my head in. Okay, but then if you start thinking about the Great Basin and you think about faulting in the Great Basin, almost always you have when you get normal faulting, the rocks split apart, but they also lay over. They rotate like that, which means the blocks rotate. So what used to be vertical might end up being, almost subhorizontal at the end of the day. Yeah. Okay, that means if you have faulting like this, you could potentially drill into the block that's been rotated down. In fact, you're drilling into the core of the system. But then it begs the question, well, hold on a minute. If that's the case, maybe that's what we did. Where's the copper-rich part of the system, right? What do you think? What do you think, Sergei? Do you think this molybdenite that we hit represents just another example of one of these low-grade moly systems that you see across the Great Basin, or do you think that this represents the core of a very special, potentially large copper porphyry?
Yeah, it's interesting that mostly molybdenum mineralization goes with the intrusive rock, either leadite porphyry dikes or quartz monzonite porphyry dikes. Every time we switch to skarn, in between these dikes, copper starts kicking in. Copper likes iron. It's magnetite. These are magnetite skarns. Every time we have magnetite in the place, copper comes in. I think it's not a low grade, but a significant grade. And because, as I previously said, in the system, was so much metal that was loaded in the intrusive and so much copper in the skarn. But because we have not seen the guts of the copper system, why? Because we are dealing not only what you said, tilted porphyry, but also chopped off and dismembered. So we are dealing with tilted, dismembered porphyry. And these dismembered porphyry parts could have dislocated the copper core, and it's sitting right next door to the moly core. Very, very simple and easy. And we have a number of examples from Arizona. Porphyry is dismembered exactly like in that position.
Okay. Well, I'm going to try to do this with my hands. Okay. So here we have a porphyry intrusion that's come up, and it's a shell of copper has formed around it. Okay. Yeah. Now let's pretend for a second that we're going to rotate this first of all. Okay. Yeah. And then we're gonna chop off this part. Okay. So basically, this bit is going to slide down like this. Okay. I try to do it with my hands as best I can. Yeah, I love the cinematography. He's going to go, what is this nut thing? But okay, so what you're saying is this copper shell, this copper-rich part of the shell, might have faulted off. Okay, it used to be up here, but it's slipped down, and it's now sitting basically right next to, but somewhat down, like a stair step down. Yeah. From the moly. So we drilled the moly right here. Okay, we went right into the moly system right here, but the copper-rich shell is sitting just down here. Now, where would that be, Sergei? Now, here's where I want to lead people, okay? Because while hole 20 was absolutely incredible, I think it's going to be a very interesting hole, especially once we get assays. I think it'll open up people's eyes. It's the next step from here that's very important. So tell people what we are doing now. What's the plan going forward?
Well, if you look at that picture, so what is left open? Certainly, we tested to the north, and we tested with TK9, TK10. As we see the skarnification getting weaker and gets into simple marbles. So where is the other direction? Southwest turned out to be not as good as we anticipated. But what is left? The western direction from TK20, TK8, and the other is south-north direction to the south. The third direction, I would say, is also vertical, because these things, and we see some uplifted, some dropped down blocks. So these bits and pieces could have moved around, and they could be sitting waiting for us to be picked up by drilling.
Okay, so where are we drilling next, Sergei?
The next, we moved the drilling rig from TK20 to the hole which we named TK21. Has nothing to do with the lucky 21 number. could be, but it's close to the location of that old drill hole you mentioned, TK5, and this will be a vertical drill hole and will go to the targeted depth.
Okay, so basically, why I took this in a full circle is because I want people to understand that when that hole failed, okay, in 2022, that hole failed, and we left that hole in about 2 meters with nice chalcopyrite. Okay, to me, it looked like it was going into something, and perhaps something big. Okay, now we are actually going clear full circle. Okay, and we're going to go back. And we're going to drill hole 5 again, and this time it's going to be called hole 21. But what's really cool is that we now know that there is a porphyry there. 20 is demonstrated. We got the core of the porphyry, and like I showed you earlier, basically the shell part of the system could be intercepted by hole 21 here. Okay, so that's our hope, is that the copper-rich shell that we might have just barely tagged in hole 5 a few years ago now, is actually still sitting there waiting for us to find. I think it could be an amazing discovery. All right, that's our thesis. Are we 100% sure this is going to pan out like we hope? No, we can never be 100% sure. There's only one way to find out, and that's to drill a hole, and that's what we're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's one porphyry center. We will be studying. The other porphyry center is to the south, and that uplifted block is another significant value growth game in the thinking. And in order to improve our ability to target there, we're putting geophysics. So we, in a couple of weeks, we will be conducting a combination of IP and T. Why IP is because that uplifted block is very oxidized from the surface, and with copper, chalcopyrite, pyrite, quartz, chalcopyrite, pyrite stockwork. So that will create a good possibility for secondary enrichment and the formation of the chalcocite like it. That's what we will test. Geophysics is planned to cover from over north to TK6, so all the way to the south. And then will be a couple of east-west lines. So it will be a whole Thompson Knolls project area covered by geophysics. And first with geophysics, we will outline the limits of that chargeability, and then basically that TK19 drill hole is left to test the bullseye of that chargeability anomaly in the south.
Okay, that's awesome. So what you're saying is basically, in the numbering sequence, there's one hole that we skipped, and that's TK19.
Yes,
It's
correct.
not that we didn't do that by accident. There's actually a plan to drill
Exactly.
TK19 once we have the data, and we'll come back to it, and that's fine. Okay, but
Precisely.
this discussion today should give people a very clear idea of the process of discovery. Okay, it is never a straight line. I'd love to say that an ore body can be found with the first drill hole every time, that geologists are the smartest people in the world, and that we know exactly what to do. It's not the case, guys. Even with a very large target, like a porphyry target, you'd think, gee, how could you miss something like that? It's enormous. Well, you know what? If you think that, then come to Great Basin sometime and look across a valley in the Great Basin and realize that's a lot of space. Okay, you gotta use a lot of really good smarts to figure out where to put a drill hole in the middle of basically an infinite valley of space. I mean, it's mind-boggling to think that we can make discoveries at all. Okay, now you told me one time. This is where I want to leave it today. You told me one time. I think it was when I was actually at site in 2022. I asked you, how many holes do you reckon it takes to make a porphyry discovery? Like what's the average number of holes? Tell people how many holes on average it takes to make a porphyry discovery.
Well, when we are dealing with the exposed porphyries in the past, and you take some brilliant examples. For example, let's take Escondida is a world class and currently the major copper cow for the world. Yeah, it was number 6 drill hole that intercepted the chalcocite blanket. But before it was just drilled in the periphery. And at certain time, even David Lowell, whom I knew personally, and Pancho Ortiz, whom I also knew as my friend, he was telling the story. Basically, initially, the first drill holes went in propylitic alteration, and once you hit propylitic, basically apatite drops down. But persistence, I think we are touching a very, very important part of the conversation, Quinton, that successful discovery teams, they need certain setting of culture and mindset in receptive to that culture. I call it PICT culture, for abbreviation: persistence, innovation, courage, and teamwork. So these are critical elements to have in the team in order to be successful, because we are challenged. And that was in the past for outcropping system, but now for the exploration phase, when we are dealing with the majority of blind covered system, that is even more important in order to be successful and deliver a discovery success. So,
Okay.
how many exactly? I think for the blind system, you need to be talking about several dozens of drill holes in order to start getting a better picture and better understanding. And when you apply that successful culture, certainly you will deliver the success. But it is critically important to be able to do those drill holes in order to understand. It's like I always use an analog of dark room. Dark room, somewhere in the dark room on the wall, there is a target. And if you put yourself in a dark room and blind your eyes, and now you are given a dart and the task to hit that target, what are the chances to hit the target? Pretty low, pretty low. Yeah. But if you help yourself with the right culture, with the right setting, if you help yourself with the right understanding of geology and what Mother Nature is telling, you give yourself an opportunity to get kind of a shimmering light where that target might be and where you need to direct your dart.
Okay. Well, I do remember you telling me it would take at least a couple dozen holes to make a discovery at Thompson Knoll. Okay. So, and I just think it's funny because here we are, we're going to drill hole 21. I think we've already made a discovery now with full 20, but sometime in the next few holes, we're going to have a smoker.
Yeah, I'm totally in favor of it.